in order for you to get the higher curriculum, you need to be a coach. I was like, oh shit. Oh, okay, fine. I'll be a coach. And in order to be a coach, I have to enroll people. I got to find out enroll people. And then in order to get to like, higher and higher levels of the curriculum, I had to work my way up what they call the stripe path, which is like a martial arts belt system. I just put my mind to it because also like I'm very, very motivated. And I thought, well, I want to get that piece of information that's available in that training. And I have to be like an orange sash to get that, and then I have to be like a green if I want to open a center. So I thought I'm going to work towards those things, but the whole ranking system was weird because sometimes it was based on, and look, there were some things that theoretically were amazing. Like in order to get to a certain rank, you had to have an understanding of your pattern. And then to get another rank, you have to have a way to come up with a plan to address that pattern. All things that are kind of amazing. But then there was like, if you were loyal, when shit hit the fan, because, years before there was what's called the NXIVM 9. There were these 9 women that basically said, this is bullshit, and they left. And Raniere and his legal people went after some of them for years. And I stayed loyal, and my loyalty was rewarded by like, well, let's give him a promotion kind of thing. And they knew at that point, because Sarah and I were building, our organization together, they knew that I wanted to get a center going, with Sarah. So they finally, gave me the green sash, which meant now I could actually go and open a center. So I got to green, and the way it works is, it's white, which is a student, yellow, which is a coach, orange, which is a proctor, green, which is a senior proctor. And then there's many, many levels above, but people that only achieved senior proctor, counselor, senior counselor, and then the great vanguard. And Nancy Sullivan was the prefect. So I worked my way up to that level, but because I started to spend time in Albany, because basically I was thinking, I'm going to get the holy grail of this guy's information, and he did some really interesting things. You talk about, cycles of narcissistic abuse. So I get to, finally Nancy says, if you really want to like learn this shit, you need to move here. I'm like, fuck, fine. I'll give it a year. So I give it a year. And for a year, I'm pestering Raniere. Okay, when are we going to start working on like, show me how to make movies? Like, when are we going to do this? And he's just not paying attention to me. And I'm like, this is so weird. And eventually on my birthday, he calls me at like 6:45 a.m. He says, let's go take a walk. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is it. And he takes a walk with me and he says, okay, this is my idea for a film. And I think, finally, we're going to work on this.
Yeah.
And so it feels like this feeling of finally I'm getting this reward, right? And then I begin writing everything down. I begin recording him, writing everything down, turn it into like a treatment for a film. And I send it to him, and his sidekick, Pam Kafritz, who's now gone, she died. She says to me, he loves it. And I was like, oh my God, that's great. So I go have a meeting with him. He loves it. That was the last time he loved anything I did.
Oh, wow.
Because then it was years of picking apart every draft of everything I did, And you sort of see it in the vow, because there's a moment where he's giving me feedback, in the editing room. That was common.
That was one of the more heartbreaking parts for me. You were so ready to show him your labor of love, and he was just knocking it down. And yeah, that was a tough scene.
Yeah, that was hard. So, basically, I got to the point that they wanted me on the executive board, and, I was, running various centers. And the other thing that was interesting was, which I realized wasn't true, but I think I thought it was true. Pam Kafritz, was an heiress, a very wealthy heiress that he got under his clutches like 30 something years before. Very wealthy. And she says to me one day, she says, he doesn't have very male friends. I think you're his only male friend. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. So I begin to think like that's true.
Yeah.
And he basically intimates that that's true, which is not true. He just generally didn't get on with men very well. And I begin to think, oh, well, maybe we do have some special kind of, I guess, bond of some kind. And it was weird because I guess I saw him like the older brother, the wiser older brother, but I was terrified of him as well, which I couldn't admit. And in the vow as well, I think I mentioned at one point when I'm in the gym, I say to him, I have suppressive thoughts about you. And he says, what, you mean you want to kill me? I go, no, I want to get away from you because I was creeped out. The logical part of me said, well, that's illogical that you're creeped out.
Yeah.
This man has a lot to offer. Why would you be creeped out? Because what was going on is that your instinct starts to go offline. Your gut goes offline. And you start to think, and you're told that those gut feelings you're having are your limitations that need to be rooted out. And Nancy and every single high-ranking woman around him would say to me, if you're having a problem around him, you have suppressive issues because you shouldn't have a problem around him. And I was like, oh, that sucks. I mean, I guess I got to figure out what's going on with me. You know, it's sort of like people may not realize when you have a lot of people just saying the same thing again and again and again, it becomes part of the culture. You start to believe it. And the other thing that happens, you know, when you go into a new social situation, especially when you're younger, you don't know what the rules are. So you kind of keep quiet for a while. Mm-hmm. And you figure out, like you go to a new school, you figure out what the rules of everything are. And you start to buy into those rules, you know, who's in, who's out, this kind of thing. And I think that's what happens in these kind of situations. Like I started to see the way they treated him with such a deference. And I thought, well, I can't see it, but like, okay, maybe he's great. Because at first I was like, I don't know what the fuck the big deal is, you know. But the way they treated him, I was like, I must be missing something.
Right.
You know, the emperor has no clothes, but I was dressing the emperor in my mind.
Right. And that's one thing that you mentioned in your What is a Cult video, doctrine over person, which I find so relatable. And the amount of times I've heard the gospel is true, but the people aren't perfect for Mormonism. I just want to pull my hair out because you detach the person at the top, but the thing is, you can't detach the person from the top. They're the ones creating the doctrine. So you really can't do that. But it's such a good way to make people give allowances to Keith, or, you know, he's not perfect. And even Keith himself is, I never claimed to be perfect. I've never claimed, you know, he has a certain level of humility that makes you think, well, yeah, he's not narcissistic. Yeah. He even says that he doesn't know all of the answers. What was your opinion on Keith? Like, especially now that you have this new perspective, how can you kind of analyze his behavior as a cult leader?
Listen, very, very strategic, some of the stuff he did. I mean, I didn't think he was much of a big deal until I started having breakthroughs in the curriculum, because then Nancy say, and this is from him. Right. He's the mind that created this. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then about 10 days into my first intensive, I sat down with him to have a chat at Nancy's house. And it was like a long chat. I think it was like 5 hours. All these chats seems to be 5 hours. And it blew me away because the guy was thinking circles around me. And so I went from it. When I first saw him, I thought, this guy's like a schlub. I mean, this is it. This is the guy. Okay. But then I thought, okay, well, don't be materialistic. You know, just because somebody looks a certain way doesn't mean, you know, don't be like this intellectual racist. Stop it. So I go, okay. What he did that was so strategic is he acted humble, but he had everybody else prop him up all the time.
Right.